And so now the question that you all have is, am I a boss? Well, a little bit about me. I am a web developer. I made a company called Arcane Palette in 2007 with my wife. A couple years ago, we started a theme development shop called Museum Themes. I work for these guys, Event Espresso, and they make an awesome event management plugin. And yeah, all those things. I've also been here speaking before. I spoke last year on WordPress theme development again. Last year my presentation was more about sort of jumping into it from a beginner standpoint. So if you weren't here last year or you didn't get a chance to see it, that's where it is. And I'm on Twitter. And if you guys want to follow along or want to check out this presentation later, that's the bit.ly link. It'll take you to this presentation. WP theme boss, all caps. So this year I wrote a theme that I submitted to the WordPress theme repository. That theme is called Museum Core. You can download it now. We're going to be talking about theme development and sort of what it took in the process that I had in submitting the theme to the WordPress.org repository. There's obviously other requirements and things and considerations you need to be thinking about if you're going to try to do that. So here's a little intro to my theme. YouTube, you're killing me. Wait for it. So that's that. I also did the music to that. I thought it would be fun to do something ridiculously dramatic for a WordPress theme. So, how many people here have built a WordPress theme? Okay. How many people here have submitted it to the WordPress.org repository? 1, 2, 3. So not as many people. How many people have tried submitting it to the WordPress.org repository? Is that different? Okay. So if you've never submitted anything to the WordPress.org repository, there's a different process. Obviously, if you're building a theme for a client, you don't really need to think about deprecated functions. You can pretty much be doing what you've been doing and what you've read about or seen in tutorials and stuff. If you've gone through the WordPress.org repository, and if you've submitted things, there's a little thing called the WordPress Theme Review Team. And they go through every submitted theme, and they test it through a bunch of rigorous checks, and they look for old code, bad code, things that are broken, and they also make sure that that your theme is following the WordPress Theme Review guidelines. These are all the things that the theme review team is looking at when they are checking your theme. So there's a lot of stuff there. When you're building a theme for a client, you might not really be thinking about code quality, but so that's something that they're going to be looking at that would be different than if you were doing it on your own. So what we're going to talk about is sort of not just how to build a theme, but also how to get ready if you're going to submit it to WordPress.org. And by the way, if you're even considering, if you're if you're thinking of building a WordPress theme shop, if you build themes for clients, putting your theme in WordPress.org, it's a great way to not just reach out and put something out there for the community, but also to sort of get your name out there as a developer, as a designer. So people will start downloading your stuff and giving you feedback, and you know, you have people using your stuff. And, it gets you exposed to a wider array of potential clients or potential users that you wouldn't have necessarily had before. So it's worth doing. So with all these guidelines and requirements and whatnot, there's it can be daunting, especially if you submit your awesome theme and you think it's fantastic and it's super amazing and you spent a lot of time on it, and then it comes back immediately with 87 things wrong with it. So there's this little Japanese man. He ran and started a small automobile company. I think it was called Honda. And he said that success represents the 1% of your work which results from the 99% that's called failure. So what does that mean to us as developers? Get used to failure. It's going to take a lot of attempts and iterations before you get your theme submitted or accepted in WordPress.org repository. Now, it's possible that if you went through all these steps that I show you and you submit your theme, it's possible that it could get accepted right away. And if that happens, tweet me, email me, because that would be awesome. It didn't happen for me. But because this is a learning process and I didn't know about a lot of these things that I'm going to tell you about. So learn from my mistakes. Learn from my failures, my 99%. Because the goal of the WordPress.org repository is not to have every theme in the world, it's to have the best. So they have to have all of these requirements to make sure that, you know, it's not going to break every plugin that's in their WordPress.org repository. And if anybody has been following the whole theme forest thing the last week, you know, probably I would bet that any WordPress.org hosted theme in the repository would not have any of the problems that people often complain about with theme forest themes, because theme forest doesn't have the same kind of rigorous review process. I'm told that they're fixing that. I'm told that they're working on things. I'm told that there's other themes that are sort of from a legacy system that are still in their system, and now they have more checks and more reviews. But I'm willing to bet that hands down any theme on .org would compare better than most themes on ThemeForest. So if you were at my my presentation last year, I sort of went over the really super, super basic files that you need in a WordPress theme so that you could make a child theme, which is pretty much just a style.css and maybe some other templates, but you could make a child theme with just a style.css. If you're building a WordPress theme, there's more files that you need to have to make it sort of functional. Really, the bare minimum is style.css and an index.php and maybe a sidebar. But if you wanted to have like a different template for your single posts or your pages versus your blog page, if you wanted to have a unique template for your 404 page, you're going to want to have those files. Then there's even more specific files. You can do a right-to-left CSS style sheet for internationalization and languages that are oriented in that direction. There's frontpage.php and home.php, which we'll talk about a little bit. Basically, the difference is that front page is if you're using a static page to be your home page, and so you're not displaying all your blog posts, and you have a frontpage.php that will style your front page differently than if you were using just a regular, if you weren't using it, which would use your page template. And home is the same thing, except that's your default blog page. So if you have a front page and you have a home.php, then the home takes the place of your index.php. It shows all of your blog posts. So if you had like a custom front page with a static page, and you had that laid out however you wanted, and then you clicked on news or home, you could do like a magazine style theme, and so you'd have, that page would be styled differently. And you can do unique category, tag, author, and other archive pages templates. Category and tag are obviously the archive pages for categories and tags. Author.php will by default show all the posts by that author, but you could also do a cool thing where you hook into the information that's entered into your user profile in the back end, pull that data out and sort of make a profile page so you have information about this author on the top and then all the posts by that author underneath. Search.php does your search results. So it'll display your search results differently. If you wanted to say X many results for your query, whatever, you would want to put that on your search.php. And if you want to style your attachments, your post attachments, if you're using that, usually when I have like an image in a post, I just link to the image and use like Fancy Box or something to make it come out. But if you're using attachment pages, then it would go to a different page and you can style that differently. And then you can go even deeper than that. If you're using custom post types, you can make a custom template for post types. You can make custom templates for pages by using the page slug. Page hyphen and then whatever the slug for that page is will by default use that template for that page. You can also just make a regular random template, name it whatever you want, and then we'll talk about this in a second too. If it has template name in the file, then it will show up in the templates dropdown. You can do a template for a specific category that's styled differently than your other category archive pages, and the same thing with tags. If you're using custom taxonomies, there's a template for that you can use. You can do date-specific archive pages. If you wanted to style images or any other type of file differently than other attachment pages, that's what the image.php is used for. Here's an example of the custom templates. So if you were going to do, like a lot of times, I'll make a page -home.php instead of a front page. And so that'll show up, and then I'll put this template name up there. So if I have a page that is named home, then and that's the slug, then that'll be automatically the home page. But it also shows up in the menu, so if I don't have that, then I can pick it off of the menu. As long as your file, it could be named whatever you want, as long as your file has template name at the top of the file, then it'll show up in that drop-down list. So I like to look at this. It's a really big, confusing thing. This is the template hierarchy, and this is available in WordPress.org. And what this is showing is all of the different, like what defaults to what, depending on what page you're looking at. And it can be daunting to look at because it's a lot of flowcharty goodness. But basically, it goes through every possible page that you can be looking at on a site and what template it's going to look for first. If it doesn't find that, what it's going to go to next. And if it doesn't find that, what it's going to default to at the end. So an example, what page am I looking at? Well, let's say I'm looking at just a blog index page. So I've got a regular blog, with the posts on the front page, so like maybe a tutorial site or something. So the first thing that's going to look at is it's going to look for a home.php, which we talked about, which is your default blog post page. And if it doesn't see that, then it's going to default back to the index.php. Most things you'll see go back to index.php. So if the more specific template is not found, then it will always default back to index.php. So this is useful and handy in figuring out how specific you can get, because you can get pretty deep. You can go through specific, like I said, specific tags styled differently than other tags and things like that. Your theme needs a theme style sheet, and it needs to have that header. And if you're submitting it to WordPress.org, it needs to have that header. I mean, not with 2010, obviously, but it needs to have all those fields that are in there. Otherwise, it will get rejected.
What is the hierarchy of the front pages? Is that new? I didn't know this.
Nope, it's not new. It's been around for a little while. For frontpage.php?
In the dashboard?
No, frontpage.php. If it's there, And if you're using a static page, so if you're using the setting in the back end to use a static page for your front page, then it will default to frontpage.php, and then if that doesn't exist, it'll go to whatever your page template, or if you have a custom page template for that page.
For front page by itself?
If it's there, if you're using a static page for your home page, it would look for frontpage.php.
I see. But so, I didn't know.
Yeah, it's not new specifically that I'm aware of. It's just not very commonly used because I think I usually use page hyphen whatever to do my front pages, but you can do that as well. So it's theme style sheet. Hopefully we'll have time for questions at the end too. So, but if you do have a question about something I'm talking about, just shout. Yeah. So theme style sheet. This is what it looks like. The license and license URI is actually more important than you might think because it needs to be worded and formatted correctly, and the URI needs to be like the right URI that the review team is looking for. When I submitted my theme, I was using my theme is released under GPL 3. And I was using a link for the URI that was going to opensource.org because I think that how they have it laid out on that site is prettier than how it's laid out on new.org, and I got dinged for not using new.org. So it needs to be sort of the official license, and I think that there's a doc in the codex somewhere that tells you what the license names need to be listed, because it's not, my first pass again was just using GPL v3, like sort of like a tag, but it actually has to be new public license version, whatever. And they'll ding you for that. And your theme might also, you might also want to build a theme functions page, which is the functions.php. And this is another thing that's a little bit different. I mean, if you're building a bare minimum child theme, you don't necessarily need a functions.php. But if you're building even a bare minimum WordPress theme that's a parent theme or a regular theme, you probably do want a theme functions file or functions.php because you'll probably want sidebars. And unless you're registering your sidebars in a functions.php, you're not going to get them unless you were sort of hard coding them. And you can do other things like enable other features like post thumbnails, nav menus, custom backgrounds, custom whatever, or create and set up new functions that are unique to your theme. Also, you might want to have sidebars. So you need at least a sidebar.php. And if you're doing multiple sidebars, or if you wanted to have sidebar options or something, you can do sidebar hyphen something, like sidebar left, sidebar right. And then the way you call that differently is when you do your get sidebar call in your template file. If you put in the parentheses whatever the slug is, whatever that comes after that hyphen, it'll pull that sidebar as opposed to the default sidebar, which is pretty cool. I do it all the time. So this is my theme. The options page, if you were paying attention to the video, it's changed quite a bit since I made that video. And this is what my options page looks like. And I've got different tabs for different types of functions or different types of options. This is what my file list looks like. Again, this is very different from a child theme, which really hardly requires any files. What I'm doing with all these post hyphen whatever is I'm using post formats. So when I'm loading my my post template, or my single template, or my index template, or whatever, it's doing it's checking what type of post format the post is, and it will go into one of these different. It'll use get template part and use whatever template is used for that specific type of post. So I can style each post format post differently. That's what that's doing. I also have this includes folder where I set up my theme options and stuff. And this is part of my functions file. Probably you can't see it very well, but you can see it's more than just a sidebar. I'm setting up an options page. I'm adding some theme support for different functions. Setting up a bunch of menus, setting up for support for all of the post formats, and things like that. So, if you are going to submit your theme to WordPress.org, you need to know your stuff. And so, what we're going to talk about a little bit now is how you get to know your stuff. There's lots of plugins, and even going through the process of submitting your theme to WordPress.org, it goes through several checks, and you have a track ticket, and when you submit, and then it comes back, and a lot of times they'll put a link to this is how you do X that you're trying to do here. So even that's a learning process. But the first thing, and if you're thinking about doing this at all, or even if you're not, you probably should be using the theme check plugin. How many people use this or are aware of it? Yay. What this plugin does is when you're submitting your theme to WordPress.org, it does an automated check about just really bare minimum base level kind of functionality and like what functions you're using and that sort of thing, making sure that you do things the right way. If it triggers any problems or errors. This plugin is that check. It actually might be even a little bit more rigid than when you submit your stuff to WordPress.org and the automated check. So again, if you're going to be submitting your stuff to WordPress.org, you should have this plugin because then you'll know before you even upload it whether or not your theme is going to pass that initial check. And it looks like this. It looks like this when your theme is not so fantastic. You can see it's got a whole bunch of warnings. It talks about required things that your theme should be doing that it's not, and problems that it picks out and things that need to be changed. And usually it'll tell you, what you should be doing instead. And that's also something that will come up in one of these other plugins that we're going to talk about. Like, oh, not this one. And then there's the theme unit test. You should be testing your themes with the theme unit test. If you've gone to WordPress.org and you've seen this, this is basically what the theme unit test is. It's an export file, a WordPress export file that has a whole bunch of posts and different types of post formats from different authors. It tests basically everything that you can test in a theme. And so if you're testing your theme with this theme unit test, then you will be prepared for all the different crazy things that your clients are going to throw at you or your users are going to throw at you when they're actually using the theme. Again, this is useful if you're trying to get something. It's essential if you're trying to get it submitted to WordPress.org because they're going to be using this. But it's also useful if you're just building a client theme. That way, because your clients are undoubtedly going to throw something wacky at you. Because that's what clients do. So how many people code with WP debug turn set to true? That's not enough people. WP debug gives you a whole bunch of alerts and notices and warnings from PHP particularly, and also WordPress. It basically spits out a whole bunch of things you're doing wrong and where in the code they are being done wrong. So there's a plugin called Debug Bar, which so if you're coding with WP debug set to true, this goes into your WP config file. If you're coding with that, and don't do this on a live site, do it on your local host or whatever your development setup is. It'll spit out all this information at the top of the page. So if you're using Debug Bar instead, it instead gives you a little button at the top of in your admin bar, and then you click on that and you get a page that looks like this. So it's not breaking your theme, your layout or anything. It's just giving you a little light up button if you're doing something wrong or if there's a warning or something. So debug bar is worth doing, and WP debug is pretty much essential. And I think that's another thing that they because again, theme review team is going to be using debug set to true, and they're going to be saying in the notes if you didn't do something that was then if you weren't coding with debug set to true, and you did something that you would have gotten a notice about, they will say, always test with WP debug set to true. So yeah, and this looks a lot prettier than the big horrible mess that goes to the top of your page if you don't have it. Was I something? No. Then there's Debogger. This is another tool or plugin that the theme review team uses. It looks like this. And what this does, this goes at the bottom of each page template and also in the admin pages. And it does a lot of the same sorts of checks that the theme check plugin and using debug set to true do. And a lot of times I think that the theme reviewers will sort of copy and paste what comes out of this little panel right here when there's an error, and they'll put it into your track ticket. So again, if you're going to be submitting something to WordPress.org, it's good to have what they're going to be looking at when they're testing installed on your environment so that you're prepared and you can fix those problems before you send it in. Then there's a plugin called Log Deprecated Notices, and this plugin gives you a list of all of the functions that you're using in your theme that have been replaced by newer functions or newer versions of that function, and what to replace them with and where they exist in your code, what files and whatever. The theme review process, or the theme review guidelines are, I believe, they will. So you should not be using a if function exists check for functions that have been introduced more than one version prior. So if it was released, so we are on 3.3 right, or 3.4 right now. If it was a function that was introduced in 3.3, you can do the functions exists check, but you're not going to want to do backward compatibility for functions that were introduced before that. So you're not going to do a if function exists check for a register sidebar. And this tells you what all those functions that you have in your code are. If you're using an old function, it also gives you a list. One of those drop downs is it tells you when those, like what versions those functions were introduced in, so you can filter by that as well. Then this one is kind of cool and new. What Monster Widget is it's one widget that goes into your widgetized area, and it does for the sidebar in the widgets what the theme unit test does for theme content. So basically, like it sounds, it creates a monster widget. It loads every single default widget into your sidebar, just one widget that you're dragging, and it'll do all these things, and it'll go on for page after page after page. It's just a huge thing. But this way that you're testing about against every possible thing that your client or your user will throw into the sidebar, and they really try to break things pretty well, because there's a pipe test that I fail. The theme review team is not, that I know of, using this as a requirement yet, but I know that a lot of them are using it on their testing environments. So again, it's another thing to be loading onto your setup so that you're prepared for things that they're going to be looking at. And also just for your own benefit, because I don't ever look at the calendar style sheets, because I don't ever use them myself. So but other people might. So this shows you what that stuff would look like and the things that you might forget because you just don't use it. If you're going to be doing a theme options page, you need to be using the settings API.
I have a question about the plugins. Do you tend to run them all at the same time, or some of them kind of resource?
None of those are anything that would be even remotely resource intensive. They're just running different checks. So yeah, it's not gonna hurt to have them all running at the same time.
Especially if you're doing most of that.
Yeah, right. Settings API. So when I was first writing themes, and I saw some tutorial, it was actually this tutorial, how to make an advanced theme options page, and I was like, oh, this is awesome. I could do like sidebars, and I could do all these different things. And this maybe not this specific incarnation, but this general framework for theme options pages made the rounds for about a year or so. Got reposted and reblogged and various other things, and a lot of people were using this, and this is not using the settings API. It kind of uses it for some things, but it's not validating or sanitizing any of the data. It's not, it leaves it wide open for your site to be completely broken with some of those input boxes. You could just inject HTML and it doesn't do any checking for it. And what the settings API does is it protects against all that stuff, and it sanitizes all that stuff, and it stores all that data the right way in the options table in the database. So instead, use this tutorial, which is done by Theme Shaper, which is it's a blog that is done, written by, I believe, the Automatic theme guys, theme team. And it gives you a sort of a framework and the same sort of deal where you can take this code and you can modify it and you can tweak it and add to it, and it shows you how to do all the same things while using the settings API. It's worth learning settings API if you're going to be doing any kind of theme functions, or if you're thinking about getting into plugin development. If you're storing any data at all, that's how you should be doing it. So it's worth checking out.
What are your opinions with some of those frameworks like Themes framework or Page Lines or
I haven't looked at their code. Yeah. My personal opinion tends to be that a lot of those things that I've seen, and I have looked a little bit at WooThemes just from the front end. I haven't looked at the code, but I get bothered by really fat, bulky theme options pages that have tons and tons of stuff. I end up, like, from a user standpoint, I end up feeling like that's too much. So I would rather do it a different way, and using WordPress functions or WordPress versions of these same things that they're doing. I mean, a lot of those things, you think about it, like a lot of those theme options pages that WooThemes and other people are doing, those were built before WordPress had a lot of customization options like custom backgrounds and custom headers and custom menus. And so they had these huge theme options pages because that was sort of what they were coming into, and they needed to have all these different options because people needed them. Now WordPress has a lot of stuff built in, so yeah, I try to use WordPress functions whenever possible and minimize the stuff that I'm adding as much as possible. Yes, Tom? 10. Okay. So this is a cool tutorial. I just discovered Paul Lund recently. He does lots and lots and lots of WordPress theme or WordPress tutorials, and he does this tutorial specifically has basically if you're using post class or body class in your code, this shows you every single class that gets added to whatever one when you're using those two functions. So it's pretty neat to see all the stuff that's added and find new things that you might not have known existed. This comes up on the theme review mailing list a lot, particularly when people are using CSS frameworks or icon sets, is what license they are released under. There are some CSS frameworks that are released under a Creative Commons attributions license, and which is also the case for probably most icon sets, which is fine and dandy when you're taking that stuff and you're using it for a client. But if you're using it for redistribution, i.e. WordPress.org, you're going to have problems because that license isn't actually written for that. So rather than trying to dig into all the licensing restrictions and all the legal stuff of, involved in what framework or icon set or whatever code that you're using is released under, it's better just to look for GPL stuff and then not have to worry about it. Because if it's released under the GPL, you're going to be good to go. If it's released under something else, you might be okay and you might not. So be literate. Learn about what's going on in the WordPress community. This goes back to know your stuff. There's lots of places to learn about what's going on in WordPress. One great resource is the Theme Review Team mailing list and make.wordpress.org/themes, which is where they do discussion about theme guidelines and the review guidelines and other things. Obviously, there's tons of blogs, WP Candy, WP Tavern, WordPress News, so that you know what dev versions or what's going to be coming in the next version. I use WPMail.me, which is a weekly mailing newsletter that he curates WordPress related posts from all over the web. So I use that. I also subscribe to Daily WordPress Reference, which puts a WordPress function in your inbox every day. So a lot of that stuff might be stuff that you're already familiar with, but it also, it's just pulling stuff out of the codex and says, here's this function, this is what it does. Just the codex page. So you're not going to find a lot of that stuff unless you're actually digging through the codex. So this actually throws some of that stuff in front of you, which is pretty cool. And that's what I got. Any other questions? I tried to rush through that end there. Yes?
Where would be the best place to go to get a good orientation on just static WordPress administration? We have some new people getting involved in WordPress administration, so what would you do for tutorials?
WordPress administration?
Yeah.
The codex.
Okay.
That's probably my answer for any documentation is the codex. If you just go to codex.wordpress.org, it'll have broken down sort of into levels or sections. Like this is the getting started area, this is for developers, this is for theme developers, and this is for plugin developers, and sort of it'll break things up that way. So that would be my first suggestion. There's also learn.wordpress.com. Which is kind of geared more towards WordPress.com, but it also goes through getting started with WordPress and learning, stuff about WordPress and how to get your blog started. Yes.
When you theme, do you usually start with some sort of bare bones framework?
I start with mine.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I don't use someone else's. I used to use whatever the default WordPress theme was at the time and build off of that. But yeah, now I use mine, and that's part of the reason why I built it with so many options and the WordPress. I pulled in every WordPress default function that I could, and I'm using as much of the WordPress core functionality as I can, so then I can use that and make child themes or build off of it or customize this little thing over here or whatever. Yeah, so I use mine. Anyone else? Theme or plugin or whatever related? It depends, and sometimes you need to bug them. Usually what they say is if you submit it and it's not touched within a week, then if you're submitting a theme to WordPress.org, you should be subscribed to the theme review list, because if you have any questions about something, it's probably more appropriate to discuss issues or questions that you have on the mailing list as opposed to in the track ticket. And also, if you're subscribed to the mailing list, if it hasn't been touched in a week, you can say, hey, look, I've got this theme. It's been sitting in the queue for a week. Can somebody take a look at it? And usually that'll sort of ping someone, and somebody will grab it. Because, again, the theme review team is all volunteers. So, stuff gets buried, and that happens. And they don't have any sort of automated, it gets dumped into this person's queue sort of process. It's so if somebody doesn't see it, they might need to be reminded. And the same with after the theme is approved. If it's approved but it's not added to WordPress.org, that process isn't automated either. That needs to be done by one of the admins. But usually you'll get a reviewer within 24 hours or so, and you will usually get your review back one way or the other within a day or two, in my experience. Anyone else? You can ask me anything. Okay. Well, I think that's it.